So when we set up the Natural Capital Committee, one of the really difficult issues at the start was this going to be science? Was this going to be basically economics, treasury driven? Or was it going to try and combine the two? And it was very clear that what we were going to do is have scientists and economists together and try to make that work. And that I thought would be our downfall, and that I thought would be the thing that I would find impossible to chair. That 8-9 years ago, multidisciplinary approaches to these problems were notable for their absence. And what we did was deliberately graft those things together. So in the first Natural Capital Committee, Rosie, Georgina Mace, Colin Mayer, and Ian Bateman in particular, welded together the two approaches. And that's one of the great successes of the Natural Capital Committee, that we actually have produced an integrated science and economic approach. We've shown what the science requires, what it tells us, what we need to do, and it's also told us how to think about allocating the scarce resources that are available for natural capital and how to get the best economic benefits. And let me just sketch out how this works. So economists seem to assume that when they don't know something, well, we just assume it and get on with it anyway. What we've done in the Natural Capital Committee is we've put together the toolkit. And we've heard this afternoon that it's very incomplete, but we know what the toolkit has to contain. We know what the census should do. We know what the natural capital assets are we need to map, and we know the domains over which we need to do that mapping, onshore, offshore, the various dimensions. We know that. And we know that we have digital technologies, a whole host of IT that enables us to refine that better and better. We will crack Chris's problem, we will crack Melanie's problem, and we will be able to put this together in a framework. And that is, in the short run, provided the Treasury comes up with the money to pay for the baseline. And Kemi Baldock this morning pointed out that money had been found for a pilot, but as a Natural Capital Committee, our advice is you need to do the whole thing, do it properly, and get on with it, and get on it really quickly so you know what you're doing. And that includes the citizen science and the components to that. If Dudley Stamp can do it with what he had available to it, there is no reason why we can't do it, and the benefits from doing that will be great. Now, why do we want to know what the baseline natural capital is? Well, at one level, we want to know whether it's getting better in aggregate. And that's because the goal is to leave more natural capital, better natural capital to the next generation. It's not, as economists typically think about this, that we want to make sure the next generation's happy, that they have as much utility as we do. Most economists, if you scratch them deeply enough, are utilitarians. I've never bought that argument. I think what we're doing is saying the next generation should inherit a set of natural capital better than we have, so that they can choose how to use that natural capital and how to use their lives. It's beyond our knowledge to be able to predict the happiness or utility that come from it, but every kid should have access to green space, every citizen should have access to clean air, clean water, and then in the framework of that infrastructure, they can decide how they want to take things forward. And the two bits that then come into it, and this is what Colin Mayer has brought to us, is, well, if you want to do that, you've got to split it into two bits. First of all, you've got to identify the capital maintenance necessary to ensure that this natural capital does not depreciate. And that's essentially renewable natural capital in the economist's terms. And what does that mean? Well, most accounting, most farm accounts depreciates the tractors, depreciates the buildings, etc. But natural capital can't be depreciated. It's assets in perpetuity. So you don't have depreciation, you have capital maintenance. That amount of money to fill the holes in the road to make sure the roads continue to function as roads. And that's exactly what we want to do across into the natural environment. Now that has a very, very radical consequence. If the job of the state ultimately is through the public and private sector to maintain that natural capital through time. The first charge of the revenue account of the government ought to be capital maintenance. And when the Chancellor stands up and announces the most humongous deficit we've ever known, and then the one after that that's even bigger, this should be net of the capital maintenance. And by the way, for the energy system, for the water system, for the railway system, for the road system, etc., for all the infrastructures, we want to make sure that that's done. That radically transforms our view about where the economy is and what the state of the economy is, and whether we in our current generation are living beyond our environmental means or not, whether we're paying our dues to make sure that goes into the next generation. Then we want to find the enhancements. Okay, now what we had in the example that Kathy put up, in some of the examples that Rosie had and earlier during the course of the day, were lots of great ideas. There is no dearth of ideas for things we could do to make our natural capital better. Melanie had a whole suite of things that we ought to be doing. And I'm sure that others have those too. The problem that an economist brings to this, or the skill that an economist brings to that, is to say there isn't an infinite sum of money. That's why we are the dismal science. We can't give everybody a Christmas present. And given that that's the state of the world we find ourselves in, given the amount of money that's available, say there's 3 billion for agricultural subsidies, how can we spend that money to get the greatest environmental bucks in natural capital terms to best make sure we do the job of making sure those assets are passed on to the next generation enhanced? And that's where the tools of economics become very useful. You know, if you spend money on X, you haven't got it available to Y, to spend it on Y. That's why I asked Melanie the question, well, would it have been better to spend the money in the marine area if we care about carbon, or better to spend it in planting trees at the top of a river catchment, or putting the carbon back in the soils? These are choices. And at the moment, they're not choices that are made with a view to maximising the environmental benefit of totality. They're based on the grounds of bias, what citizens groups might say they want. They're based, let's be honest, on ignorance quite often. We just don't know what we're doing in certain circumstances. And that's why getting this science right enhances our ability to make those choices. Now that opens up the policy box. And that's where scientists and economists should be engaged. You see in the coronavirus briefings, science, we've got to listen to the science. There are no economists in that discussion. I would never want to just listen to the economists, but when you make public policy choices, whether they be about lockdowns or they be about whether to plant trees, you know, you do have to have some policy framework to do that. And broadly, there are two options out there, or philosophies. There is the one which says, you know what we want is to get some good regulators to go round each farm, each particular asset, and tell people what to do. And I'm sure, as Chris stressed, that by enhancing the regulation, we can take that forward. We could go around and tell people not to plant maize on the catchment around the Somerset levels, full stop. We could say that just doesn't meet the compliance. But there is an alternative way of doing this, which actually I think will be complementary in the end, which is say, let's turn it around the other way. Let's ask people what they can offer. Let's ask people to bid the improvements they can make. So take a catchment, take the even load, or take the Thames as a whole. We could ask farmers, you know, there is this pot of ELM's money, there is this pot of agricultural subsidy, you bid, you tell us what you can bring. And by the way, if you bring better benefits by doing it on a systems basis and cooperating with other farmers, you're more likely to be successful. And that is an opportunity which is bottom up, to ask people how best they can contribute to the goals within the 25-year plan. And I think that's got a lot of mileage in it. And the place it's really got mileage is in carbon. The thing about carbon is it doesn't matter where the carbon is emitted, and it doesn't actually matter where it's sequestered from the point of view of carbon. It matters for all sorts of other stuff, but not for the carbon itself. Okay? So we have a price of carbon. It's the EU ETS price at the moment. And by the way, on the 1st of January, we'll be out of the EU ETS, and there's a consultation paper from the Treasury on how we should price carbon in the post-Brexit transition world, carbon tax, emissions trading scheme, or whatever. Now, the important point is that if you have a common price of carbon, we should start thinking about applying that to sequestration, to the natural environment, paying people to sequester carbon. And then people can bid and say, you know what, I can do this number of tons and I can do it at the price you've got available in the market because I can do it really cheaply and someone else will do it more expensively. And that's a great opportunity. It's just one part to bring the natural environment sequestration side into the same framework as the emission side, which is going to be priced. And by the way, that means pricing carbon from farms as well, etc., which is slightly less politically easy. So you can do that. But of course, there are people who already do the right thing. They already sequestrate the carbon extremely well. And that's where the Elm scheme comes in, because that's essentially about keeping good practice. And that will have to be done on a farm by farm basis. Now, I say those things not because they're a comprehensive set of policy frames, but I want to go from the science to the accounting to the policy, all with the overall objective, which is dominated everything we've been doing in the Natural Capital Committee for the last 8 years, which is we have to leave the natural environment assets in a better state than we inherited them. That's the job laid down in policy. And frankly, as we demonstrated in our recent assessment of the second progress report from the government, we're not even holding the line. And that is really serious. We are 8 years in, or 9 years in, because 2011 was when this objective was set, and we're going backwards. There have been lots of successes, but the overall picture is not good. And so my passing message from the Natural Capital Committee at the end of this conference is to policymakers, to ministers, to civil servants, to everybody involved in this space, private, public sector, NGOs. Get on with it. The opportunities are enormous. This is good for the economy. It's damn good economics. It's very good science. The accounting framework is the right way to do this. What's not to like about what we've recommended? Why not just do it?